For this video, we will be talking about the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution really became a kind of turning point in Western civilization history as we began to move into what most people call the modern age. So what was the scientific revolution? It was a revolution in human understanding and knowledge about the physical universe, and this is going to expand beyond the physical universe to the human body, and then eventually it will also morph into influencing the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution reached her height somewhere in the 1600s. Before we had the scientific revolution, science itself was not really a scientific type of definition the way we think of it today. It was based almost entirely upon reason. It was more of a philosophy than it was a science. Their experimentation was not part of it, observation was not part of science. Instead, science was based on alchemy, which was the attempt to try to find precious stones and use them to treat various kinds of ailments, magical types of powers, believing that that is out there. Science was based on astrology, the movement of the stars, the reading of the stars. It was based on the teachings of Aristotle from the period back in the ancient Greek time and his work on classification systems of scientific material or biological material, and it was based on teachings from the Bible. With this new scientific revolution, we're going to see a new method of inquiry coming. And one of the biggest shifts that's going to happens with regards to this perspective of the universe. Prior to the scientific revolution, people believed that the universe was what we call geocentric, meaning the earth was the center of the universe and everything revolved around that, around the earth in circular patterns. So you can take a look at the picture that is there and see the way everything revolves around the earth, including the sun. And then beyond these revolutions were the infinite stars that remained steady. We also believed, according to Aristotle, that the movements and the establishment of biology and the earth was in place, philosophically, was in place with regards to a kind of classification system, but we didn't go much beyond that. And so our knowledge of the world was very stumbling and slow. However, there are a few changes that are going to bring us to the point of a scientific revolution. One was the invention of the lens. With the ability to be able to curve the lens in certain ways, we soon learned that a lens could become microscopic or it could become telescopic. We could see things up close or we could see things far away up close. And this is going to be transformational when it comes to studying the physical world as well as the stars and planets. Shipbuilding technology is another thing that began to push on the scientific revolution because the ships were reliant on the stars and the movement of the stars, or the movement of them in the waves, looking up to the skies. And it became pretty evident that what they were tracking wasn't actually fitting completely in with their ideas of the universe, of the stars. And so, as new advancements in shipbuilding began to take place and more Europeans began to get out onto the waters, it became more and more evident that their form of navigation fell short. Humanism is another part of the influence towards the scientific revolution. That is a focusing in on the human person, on the human body, on anatomy, and the study that is part of that. And then the Renaissance artists also helped shape the scientific revolution because as they painted not only plants, but also humans, it pushed us into a deep dive of science. Copernicus, Nicholas Copernicus, is considered one of the forefathers of the scientific revolution. His work on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres was released after he died in 1543, and it is going to change the perspective that people have of the universe. Copernicus was an astronomer who spent most of his life tracking and studying the movement of planets and the stars, and he was a mathematician. And one of the things that he discovered was that the universe is not geocentric, it is not Earth centered, it is heliocentric, it is sun centered. And he is going to teach that the sun is motionless and that the planets revolve around the sun. This is going to upset the status quo of the day. But again, this book was published after his death, so he is not going to get into a whole lot of trouble per se with his discoveries. Here you see a picture of the anatomy that was believed to be of a human being prior to the scientific revolution. Up at the top, you have the bloodletting areas where leeches would be put on, or where cuts would be taking place in the human body to let out the old blood that was sick when sickness was there. And then you also can see the tracking of the veins. Obviously, that moving into the human body was not part of the medieval period. And then with the scientific revolution and some of the Renaissance artists, we see the influences happening there. Da Vinci became one of the first to dissect a corpse, and he is going to peel back literally and look inside the human body and begin to draw what he sees there. And this is going to just lead to leaps and bounds and changes of recognizing what is happening anatomically. Johannes Kepler is going to build on Copernicus's ideas. He believed what Copernicus said, and he is going to argue that the planets are actually not revolving around the sun in a circular pattern, but in an ellipse. When the planets are closer to the sun, they move faster. Planets with larger orbits move slower. And this, of course, again, a lot of math was involved with this, developments happening as he studied the stars and the planets as well, is going to upset the status quo. Galileo is probably going to become part of the main focal point of the scientific revolution, and it's because of his work with the telescope. He is going to take the newly formed telescope, which was primarily used to scout out enemies during warfare, and he's going to turn it to the skies. And when he does this, he's going to discover a number of things. He's going to discover sunspots. He's going to discover that the universe is not perfectly put together. The planets and the moon are not perfectly put together. Jupiter's moons, all of this is going to upset the way things were viewed of the universe prior to this. He releases his discoveries in his work called The Starry Messenger, and this is going to be really released to the scientific world. But it is his work on dialogue of the two chief world systems, the Ptolemaic and the Copernican, that's going to get him in a lot of trouble. This work is going to compare the old view, the geocentric view of the universe, which was called the Ptolemaic view of the universe, with Copernicus' view of the universe, the heliocentric. And he's going to compare these two and show how the Copernican view of the universe is the correct one. Well, he writes his book in Italian, in the language of the people, rather than in the Latin, the scholastic language of scientists. And so he is going to get on the radar of the Catholic Church. Because one of the things that the Catholic Church did, they were very powerful at this time, is they merged the teachings of Aristotle and old science with the teachings of the Catholic Church. And so if the teachings of Aristotle or old science began to be challenged, the Catholic Church saw that as a challenge as well. She was not able to take the two apart. And so Galileo was arrested and charged, and he is ironically going to give his defense to the Catholic Church by proclaiming his Christian faith. He is going to proclaim that God is a creator who puts in place logical types of discoveries that can be made, and therefore the discoveries that are being made point to a great God. This, however, is not going to merge with the Catholic view of the universe at this time, and so he is going to remain on house arrest until his death. Isaac Newton will build on all of this. He will identify gravity, the idea that there is a universal force of attraction between every body in the universe. And he will lay out his three laws of motion. His Principia becomes the kind of cornerstone of the scientific revolution. Pascal and Descartes both are also going to help build into the scientific revolution. Pascal will combine his Christian faith with his developments and his findings in science. Descartes is going to really move more towards the idea that reason is the sole guide to truth. And so he famously makes the comment, I think, therefore I am, which basically means that everything out here can be doubted. The only thing that can't be doubted is me because I think I know I exist. And then he moves forward outwards that way. Math is going to have a lot of developments during this time. We can see various new types of geometry, calculus, new symbols being introduced as well. Here we have some work with the telescope and the microscope. All of these are going to transform the science world. The pendulum clock is another one of those that is going to help establish a continual idea of time, which is going to become extremely important as Western Europe moves into the modern age. And of course, the work on air pressure and barometers and how that affects weather and the phenomenon that is happening in the space around us. Artistic movements also begin to take place. The Baroque movement, which is a Catholic Reformation, brings emotion and spiritual form to art, where when you look at something, you engage with it emotionally, and Baroque types of art are developed in this period. French classicism is going to bring simplicity and balance within the art world, sometimes merging mythology and biblical themes, again, part of this overflow of this period. And then Dutch realism picks up on the everyday life. And one of our most famous Dutch artists of this period was Rembrandt and his work in capturing a lot of biblical types of stories as well as the idea of the portrait.